What are you doing out here on your own?
I've had an argument with my wife. She's accused me of being cheap.
Oh, that's terrible.
I know. She's in the kitchen ripping all the plates in half.
We're feeling a bit cheap and miserly this week. The Four of Pentacles is a card of hoarding our wealth and being an all-round skinflint. The card shows the kind of fella who, when he drops a pound, it bounces off the back of his head. In the Key to the Tarot, Arthur Edward Waite says, a crowned figure having a pentacle over his crown clasps another with hands and arms. 2 pentacles are under his feet. He holds to that which he has. So we've obviously got the material side of that, someone clinging onto their cash like their lives depended on it. Not the kind of guy you want to go out to dinner with.
I'll have you know I'm the first to put my hand in my pocket.
Yes, but you're supposed to take it back out again. Rachel Pollack says we see first of all the image of a miser, and by extension dependence on material and security for the stability symbolised by the number 4. So she's talking about the importance of the number 4 in symbolism, in particular how it relates to stability. This comes down to things like the 4 elements, which not only make up the 4 suits of the minor arcana, but also the 4 states of matter. We've got the 4 cardinal directions, 4 seasons, and the 4 forces of nature. In psychology, Carl Jung proposed that there are 4 cognitive functions: thoughts, feelings, sensations, and intuition. In a sense, we could argue that the universe is built on the number 4, right down to physics itself. A table has 4 legs, and that's about as stable as it gets.
I think the clue's in the word.
So we've talked all about the material aspect and how the fella on the card is tighter than a duck's arse, but there's also another aspect to the Four of Pentacles, the act of closing ourselves off from the outside world, especially at a time when we're feeling vulnerable. This would be the times when we throw up our defences and try to keep everyone at a safe distance. This is a similar idea to the Hermit or the Four of Swords, but there's no respite or introspection here. We're talking about someone making a conscious decision to keep to themselves, physically and emotionally. Sometimes this can be for very good reason. If we find ourselves in an uncomfortable or chaotic situation, it can be best to pull back from everyone and play our cards close to our chest. However, this isn't something that's sustainable in the long term. Rachel Pollack goes on to talk about how the man has covered most of his vital points with the Pentacles in order to try and seal himself away from everyone, but it's impossible to do that completely. She says the man cannot, however, seal his back. We always remain vulnerable to life, no matter how self-centered we try to make ourselves. The Thoth card is going for the 4 square concept big time. I had a big model of a castle that looked like that when I was a kid. Crowley says the discs are very large and solid. They look more like squares to me, but hey. The suggestion of the card is that of a fortress. This represents law and order, maintained by constant authority and vigilance. So we've got similar themes to the Waite-Smit card in terms of defence. We're just seeing it on a much larger scale here as opposed to the individual we get on Pixie's version. Once again, we've also got the alchemical symbols for the elements at the 4 corners of the fortress. So we're talking about discs, squares and triangles here, all sorts of different shapes going on. I just wanted to quickly touch on these 4 symbols. In the occult, the 4 physical elements are distinguished by their temperature and whether they're wet or dry. So for example, fire is warm and dry, while water is cool and wet.
How do you know?
Because it's water. Water does tend to be wet.
Yeah, but what about hot water?
Well, when you heat water, it turns into steam, a gas, so then it changes into the air element, which is warm and wet. So fire and air point upwards because heat rises and gas floats about, while earth and water point downwards because they're heavier and more likely to fall over. The lines on the earth and air triangles are anybody's guess. I must have read half a dozen conflicting explanations for them, but it seems to be something to do with the way the triangles form a hexagram. Anyway, I'm by no means an expert on alchemy, but I just wanted to mention that because I keep trotting these symbols out all the time. Getting back to the card, Crowley goes on to say the background is of deep azure, flecked yellow, suggesting a moat, but beyond this is a pattern of green and indigo to represent the guarding fields, whose security is assured by the fortress. So he's totally going in the direction of achieving safety within the confines of a fortress wall. Duquette talks about the perspective of the image and how all the different elements add up to this concept of safety and security. He says to properly view this card, we must imagine ourselves hovering hundreds of feet above a 4-square walled citadel, surrounded by a wide moat.
The Sforza and Marseille cards are up to their usual flowery and coiny antics. The Solabasca card features a coin-carrying lady who's clearly feeling the effects of a hot summer and has decided to go au naturel. Suspect is dancing naked through the town.
Copy that, Constable.
Well, try, but I'm not much of a dancer. The universe, under the auspices of life, acquires from it the faculty of dispensing to us the most precious influences. It incites us to rest.
Oh, there you go. We've got permission to put our feet up and have 40 winks. Thanks, Etaila.
The Hermetic title for the Four of Pentacles is Lord of Earthly Power.
I've had some real fun trying to marry up the title of Earthly Power with the image on the Waite-Smit card. It's not immediately apparent, but I've done my level best.
Brace yourself for another helping of mental gymnastics.
The Thoth card is just called Power, and it's a lot more straightforward in this regard as it shows a castle, and that's traditionally taken as a symbol of power. If you've got a castle, then I think it's fair to say that you're probably a bit powerful. Earthly is obviously the element of the suit, and relates to material things like money and what we can acquire with money. Power could be taken as an example of what happens when we accumulate money. I don't necessarily mean power over people, but instead having a bit of money would give us a sense of power over our lives, I imagine. So when we look at Pixie's image, we see a guy hoarding money, so maybe that's the earthly power that he's trying to obtain, by being a penny-pinching tight arse.
Just been for a cheap circumcision. Blimey, how did it go? Terrible. It was a rip-off.
The Four of Pentacles corresponds to the Capricorn zodiac sign and is ruled by the Sun.
We're sticking with the goat for this one, but now he's basking in the sunshine. Looking at the themes of stability and security in the Four of Pentacles, we can see a very close connection to the earth sign of Capricorn. The sun is considered to symbolise our conscious awareness and brings the added element of illumination to the party. This gives us a clarity and awareness to the motivations for material security, but we don't want that to turn to greed or excessive attachment. So this combination also gives us self-awareness and a balanced perspective on material possessions. Milo Duquette talks about the astrological importance of the sun in Capricorn and also sheds some light on the title. He says this card is well named, it is Sol in Capricorn, and to the ancients the greatest display of celestial power occurred each year when the sun entered Capricorn and conquered death by reversing its southward plunge into darkness. Four of Pentacles notable people include US founding father and first Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton, Steely Dan singer, and in my opinion one of the greatest songwriters of all time, Donald Fagen. And do you think he's sexy? He certainly hopes so. It's Rod Stewart.
The Four of Pentacles resides in the world of Asya and sits at the fourth Sephira of Hesed, on the Pillar of Mercy.
So we're at Hesed, which is the Sephira of Mercy, and we're in the world of Asya, so we're looking at the material side of that. Now that does give us a contradiction, as Hesed is a Sephira of generosity, while the Four of Pentacles is more about clinging on to things. I think the message here is that we should balance the need for security with the willingness to share and support others. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the three pillars on the Tree of Life. On either side we've got the pillars of mercy and severity. These are the opposing forces that make up the extremes of the human experience. They're the same as the pillars of Boaz and Jachin from the Temple of Solomon, which we can see at either side of the High Priestess back at number 2 in the trumps. Hesed sits on the middle of the Pillar of Mercy on the right hand side of the tree and gives it its name. According to Israel Regardie, the Sephiros arrange themselves in columns, for there are 3 on the right hand, 3 on the left and 4 in the middle. Chokmah, Hesed and Netzach are those on the right hand, and thus comprise what is called the Pillar of Mercy, comparable to the column of Jachin of the Freemasons.
The Four of Pentacles herb is cascara bark. Also known as sacred bark, Spanish priests noted its similarity to the wood used for the Ark of the Covenant.
What's this then? Ow!
But what does it all mean?
Once again, we've got a few different ways of looking at the Four of Pentacles, and as ever, that's going to come down to the context of the situation. On the surface, we've got this image of selfishness and of being tight-fisted. Waite says the surety of possessions, cleaving to that which one has, gift, legacy, inheritance. What's with all the talk of inheritance in the tarot? Anyway, cleaving to that which one has can obviously mean hoarding wealth and possessions, but it can also mean being a possessive person in relationships. Anyone who's ever been with a possessive and controlling partner will tell you that it's miserable and exhausting. Having to deal with someone's insecurities and attachment anxieties in a relationship can be very hard work, and it can turn really nasty, so this card could be telling you to be watchful of that kind of thing. In either case, it comes down to fear. Whether that's a fear of destitution or a fear of being alone, it's coming from the same place. Another way of looking at the card can be about looking after yourself, setting boundaries and trying to create some stability in our lives. In this sense, it's necessary to hang on to what we've got so we don't end up being walked all over or losing control of our situations. Also, we've got the idea of keeping things to ourselves and not being too open about our thoughts or emotions. Again, that can go either way depending on the context. Rachel Pollack says when life has broken down into chaos, then the 4 indicates creating a structure, either through material things or by turning our emotional and mental energy inwards. The card remains an image of selfishness, but sometimes selfishness may be precisely what is needed. So she also takes us back there to the idea of retreating and finding our inner self.
I got in touch with my inner self today. Oh, how wonderful! Not really. It's the last time I buy cheap toilet paper. If you are reading for a bachelor, this card predicts that a lady will say very kind things to him at an upcoming meeting.
Ooh, well I like the sound of that.
This card tells him that the marriage in question will not be successful.
Oh, okay. Back to square one then. When the 4 of Pentacles turns up reversed, it can indicate losing control, whether that's emotionally or in terms of finances. Waite says reversed, suspense. Suspense? Suspense, delay, opposition. I think Waite fancied the afternoon off when he wrote that passage, but a good way of looking at it is losing the stability we were talking about earlier. Being generous and giving is a wonderful thing, but if we go too far in the opposite direction, then we can end up all over the place. Rachel Pollack says here the energy becomes realised. The act can signify generosity and freedom if right side up indicates greed or confinement within ourselves, but it can also represent the inability to hold our life together, to give it structure.
In the reverse, this card indicates a certain opposition to your success, but you have to persevere in your affairs.
Thank you, Etaila. I shall continue to persevere in my affairs. The big takeaway for the 4 of Pentacles is finding a healthy balance between looking after yourself and taking care of others. We're not just talking about giving financially, but also giving your time and attention. Francis Hodgson Burnett once said, "If nature has made you for a giver, your hands are born open, and so is your heart. And though there may be times when your hands are empty, your heart is always full."
There's a rather stingy looking character if ever I saw one. May the coming days bring you generosity and kindness. Until next time.